Welcome back to Gale Force Winds Season 4.
It's an honor to introduce to you guys right now, we have Mr. Tom Paddon. He is a former president and CEO of Baffin Island Iron Mines Corporation, currently serves as its non-executive chairman. Baffin Island is developing the Mary River project located on Baffin Island. What? Did I get it right?
Well, you got it right.
Baffin Island, am I saying it right? I want to make sure. Nunavut. Prior to Baffin Island, Tom served as president of Vail, Newfoundland, and Labrador, and general manager of Labrador operations at Voisey's Bay. A lot of young fellas working up there from Burlington now, which is very good. They're very happy about that. Born in Northwest River, Labrador, Tom has played a pivotal role in negotiating and implementing agreements that successfully reconcile the commercial interests of developers with the rights of indigenous peoples, as well as the implementation of strict environmental performance standards in northern regions. Please, ladies and gentlemen, let's hear from Mr. Tom Paddon.
How many Labradorians in the room? Lonely. Oh, there we go. Because we got to settle this right now. So in Labrador, we pick berries. And when we pick the blue ones, we call them blueberries. And when we pick the black ones, we call them blackberries. And when we pick the red ones, we call them redberries. I don't know how you crowd wound up with partridge berries for the last time. Every time I hear it, I go, I don't know where that comes from. Anyway, what's this? Oh, here it is. All right. So when I was asked to talk to you about, hang on now. If you can't see the screen, because there's some pretty pictures, if you want to see the screen, you can move now if you want to. If you don't want to, because you don't care, you're not interested, don't bother. But for the people at the end of the room, you can't see nothing, I don't think. So if you want to come on, and the rest of you can just drift off and go to sleep. Okay, so when I was asked to come here and talk about Voisey's Bay, the agreements, how they came to be and what they've meant, my first reaction was, geez, that's old news. Who'd want to hear that? But it was explained to me how bright the future is here and what some of the issues are and what they're going to be. And so I thought that maybe giving some insight into how developers and stakeholders can work together might actually be valuable. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do things wrong, which I have too much experience with, and a little bit about how to do them right. And the talk's sort of mostly aimed at mining companies, exploration companies, but I think all parties can hopefully get something out of it. And right at the beginning, I'll state the obvious. Labrador in the 1990s is not central Newfoundland in the 2020s. So, but maybe some of the lessons apply. So going back, there was a joke in the 1990s that went around after Inco had seemingly fallen into hell on the Voisey's Bay project. Some of you may remember that. They'd paid $4 billion to buy it, and they were getting nowhere in terms of developing it. The Innu were angry with them. The Inuit were angry with them. The provincial government was making demands that the company simply couldn't meet. And essentially, we were pretty sure as Labradorians that we were about to get screwed again by another mega project going on in our backyard, think Churchill Falls. And there was a lot of anger towards Inco, and they were getting nowhere, as I say. So the joke went like this. What do you say if you're the CEO of an exploration company and your chief geologist calls you on the satellite phone one day and from the shack in Labrador and says, we've had a fabulous intersection, the core looks great, and everything's looking fantastic. Your response is, you're fired. Because looking for a deposit in Labrador at the time was good business. But finding one meant that you were going to get consigned to the same hell that Inco was walking around in after spending $4 billion to buy something that they couldn't develop. So it's not really a very good joke, but it seemed funny at the time because it was true. back then, and it took a little work to get Inco out of that hell, if you will. So, real life can be funny too. And this poor bugger didn't know it, but the joke was on him at the time. In case you don't know, that's me. It was 2011, and I was recruited as Baffinland CEO to build an iron ore mine, a port, and a railway about 1,000 kilometers north of Qikiqtaaluk. And I was really looking forward to the challenge. The budget was $6 billion. The problems were immense, and it was going to be great fun. So why didn't we get to execute that project that I'd been hired for? Well, the price of iron ore dropping from $190 a ton to $37 a ton was definitely a big part of it. And for those of you in or hoping to be in the gold business, what's gold today? Is it around $2,400 an ounce? Right. Well, imagine it dropped to under $500 an ounce pretty quickly. How would you feel? Well, I can tell you how you'd feel. That happened to me, and I remember the feeling distinctly. But I also think that we didn't have the local relationships right. And I actually think that that was a bigger issue. And you got to put that into perspective. Now, the bottom falls out of the market that you're trying to work in. And I think in retrospect, not having the local relationships right was a worse situation for us. I'll talk about that in a little while, but you've got the chairman of Baffinland Iron Mines here, and if you thought you were going to get away without seeing a few pictures of Baffinland, you're not going to. So, because we did get to spend $1 billion to build a great project up in the Arctic, and this is what all the fuss was about. That's Keykiqtaaluk Mountain. It's made out of 68% iron ore, and we went into production about in 2015, and we've been mining it ever since. If you want to put that in perspective, if you don't know much about iron ore, IOC has been in business for 60 years mining 40% iron ore, and we're pulling it out of the ground at 68%. So this is what all the fuss is about. It's a naturally primarily a lump deposit, and basically we're not really a mine, but don't tell our mining department that. They get paid for being a mining department, and they're pretty resentful if I say this, but really we're a quarry. We drill and blast and crush it, and then put it on a ship, and our customers just drop it straight into their into their steel mill, and we actually sell it as a natural pellet. It drives the people who actually have to make pellets crazy when we do this, but works for us. That's the camp at Baffinland, near the mine site. So we house over 1,000 people there, and they're drawn from every province and territory across the country, including this one significantly. There's an airstrip in the background that I'm going to come back to and talk about in a moment, because we have an aircraft, a 737, that flies in there a couple of times a week and does our crew changes. It's a large operation. And we also have a port, Canada's only deep sea port capable of taking a Panamax or a Cape-sized ship, and that's what we use. And you can see our laydown area at the top. There's a Panamax ship that's about 85,000 tons, if you want to imagine how big it is. Got our ship loader, and we've got a workforce down there, and we can store about 45 million liters of fuel there, and it's about 100 kilometers from there to the mine, which is why we want to replace that road with a railway to another site on the south side of Baffin Island, because this area is spectacularly beautiful. It's also environmentally sensitive, and we take the responsibilities that we have to operate there appropriately very, very seriously. But I'll tell you, again, the relationship has not always been easy, and we've worked really hard in the last number of years to get it right and to improve it, and we now have, and we're very proud of it. I think that's our greatest accomplishment. So I'm looking pretty relaxed and happy here. We've just loaded our first ship. It's 2015, and one last thing about Baffinland before I come back to this province is that there are more than 400 Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. Actually, I think now they're all Newfoundlanders except for one Labradorian who's working at the site. Out of a workforce, our total workforce is a little over 2,300. But after Ontario and Nunavut itself, Newfoundland and Labrador is the single greatest source of our workforce. And you might want to bear that in mind, because when mining in central Newfoundland really starts to roll, I'm pretty sure a lot of them are going to decide to drive to work rather than fly through Montreal. And so I think maybe we're training them for you. Okay. You're welcome. But let's come back and talk about Labrador, about Inco's initial short-sightedness, how we overcame it, and what happened when we did. Bear in mind, this is Labrador in the 1990s. It's $1 billion project. The land claims process had been going nowhere for decades. We'd just been through the whole low-level flying mess. Does anybody remember that? And Voisey's was being touted as the most important mineral discovery in Canada in 100 years. So it's not central Newfoundland. There's an awful lot going on here, but the expectations in Labrador back in the 1990s were just inconceivable to imagine. But some of what we've got to say, what I've got to say may be applicable to you. So, by the way, Inco was not the first to take a short-term perspective in Labrador. You'll love this, Minister. In 1924, the Newfoundland government considered selling Labrador to Quebec for $30 million, and then dropped the price to $15 million in 1925, as long as Quebec let them keep on fishing off the coast. My grandfather was up there at the time. Nobody asked him what was going on, but Quebec, of course, thought that they already owned Labrador anyway. So they didn't take the deal. And they decided to leave the final question to the Privy Council in England, which, as we all know, was a mistake on their part. But then again, in 1929, the government of Newfoundland again offered to sell Labrador, this time to the Dominion of Canada, for $110 million. And then they put the price up to $130 million. Not quite sure why they didn't start there. And Canada went, nah, pass. And we got into Canada in the end anyway. But it's just a lesson that people who go into areas that they don't really understand, or they don't really understand the value of, tend to make mistakes with a short-sighted perspective. So, coming back to Inco, this is the exploration camp in 1997. I joined Inco, or as I called it, Voisey's Bay Nickel Company. Voisey's Bay Nickel Company was wholly owned by Inco, same thing, in January of that year as the mill operations coordinator. That's a pretty good title, eh, for a guy who'd never been in mining before. And it took me a little while to realize that we didn't have a mill, we weren't in operations, and I wasn't coordinating anything. Seriously. And they'd hired me to help them solve the problems that were becoming more and more apparent in Labrador, and that they clearly were not interested in any advice I had to give, and totally ignored me. At the time, Inco envisioned a 7-year mine life, what Brian Tobin then called the scoop and run. And the company was working to push the environmental assessment process along quickly. But that winter, the federal government, the provincial government, the Innu and the Inuit all agreed on an environmental impact assessment process. But at the same time, Inco was relying on provincial permits, which had been legally issued, to push along substantial work at site. And that was a mistake. The Innu and the Inuit saw it as the early start of actually building the project before an environmental assessment had been done, and they did not react well. No prizes for figuring out what this little fellow is shouting. And I know the guy who used to make up their t-shirts, and this says, undermining the Innu at Voisey's Bay. Inco undermining the Innu at Voisey's Bay. It's a pretty good line when you think about it. So what happened was that in July of 97, 300 Innu and Inuit occupied the site, and pretty soon afterwards, 75 armed response RCMP officers were flown into the site as well. It was a terrible situation. And eventually things wind up in court. Initially, Inco wins. It gets appealed to the Supreme Court, and Inco loses. And meanwhile, the environmental assessment work and the public hearings are going on with this in the background. The panel issues its final report in 1999, following like 2 years of public thrashing of the company. But of course, at that point, negotiations with the Innu, the Inuit, and the province broke off. Everyone was laid off who worked for Voisey's Bay Nickel Company, except for 5 people. The president, the vice president, one administrative assistant who worked with them, and 2 people in Labrador. And luckily, I was one of the people in Labrador who didn't lose their job that day. So, why did they keep 2 people in Labrador on? Because the new president of INCO, a man named Scott Hand, had realized that they'd made a mistake. They had failed to build respectful relationships with local stakeholders, and over the next year or 2, that's what we were tasked to do, and that's what we did. And in late 2000, INCO, Voisey's Bay Nickel Company, the LIA and the Innu Nation quietly restarted negotiations to conclude impact and benefit agreements. We didn't tell anybody. People asked us, are you in negotiations? And we said, not really, not officially. And we would meet at these types of events. We would go to trade shows in Toronto, and not telling any secrets now, it's a long time ago, and there'd be a trade show going on or a conference going on, and we'd be staying in the same hotel, and we'd wind up talking to each other. And that's how it began. At the same time, we restarted negotiations to reach a deal with the province. And in 2002, the deal was signed with the province in June, and in August, the IBAs were signed with the Innu and the Inuit, a separate IBA with each. Project construction started right away, and we produced first ore in 2005. But what allowed for that was not the paper that we had negotiated, the agreements we had negotiated. It was a mutual understanding of each other's needs and acting on that. We and the stakeholders came up with all kinds of ideas to continue to build relationships and strengthen relationships. This is one of my favorites. We took a group of local people, we took groups of local people, in this case these are the Innu elders, into the site on a regular basis so they could see, because it's a remote site at Voisey's Bay, so that they could see for themselves what we were doing, the care we were taking of the land and the water. They could also see their kids and grandkids working on the site and have a meal with them in our cafeteria, hear what they liked about their jobs. And when the elders went home, it was them who talked about us rather than some company employee going into the community and holding a meeting and giving a progress report and saying how wonderful everything was. The elders had far more credibility than we could ever hope to achieve. That built trust and understanding. And as far as I know, these visits are still going on 20 years later. This is our first blast in ore in 2015, and that's the dark material in the back there. The light smoke, for those of you in the blasting business, that's some non-mineralized boulders that we needed to get rid of, so we loaded them up too, but it made for a pretty picture. It's a lucky camera, a lucky shot. I borrowed a camera from a truck driver, believe it or not, and if you look carefully, you can actually see fly rock. I was always amazed that I got this with some little Instamatic 35 millimeter. By the way, the driller for this blast, our first blast in ore, which was a very big deal for us, was an Inuk from Hopedale. And the master blaster was an Inuk from Mud Lake. That was a great day. At long last, the start of production. So how do we get there? Impacts and benefits agreements. We tried it and we liked it. VVNC negotiated agreements because it had to. It was a condition of construction starting on the project from the environmental assessment. We didn't do it because we willingly thought that we were going to enter into these and everything was going to be fine. We had been talking before, but once the panel recommendations came out, we absolutely had to have them done and signed before the project could start. And that added new impetus as well. In retrospect, the IBAs were the best thing that happened to us. I'll tell you why. The IBAs embodied local consent and support. So when the IBAs were finalized, they were circulated amongst the Innu and the Inuit communities. Everybody 15 years and older voted on whether or not the project should proceed under these conditions. And each IBA is 175 pages long. So they spent a long time explaining it in their communities, and eventually a vote was held, and overwhelmingly, people voted for the project to go ahead. They clearly laid out and legally enforced the parties' commitments, and they provided the backbone of the parties' developing relationship, but they were not responsible for the full development of that relationship. That was interpersonal. That was people getting to know each other. They set very high standards, but they also limited expectations to what had been negotiated. Everybody knew what we had to do, and everybody knew that what we didn't have to do. So agreeing on commitments and expectations is a healthy thing to do. You just have to make sure they're achievable. Setting goals and meeting them is a great foundation for a relationship between developers and stakeholders, and a great way to avoid disappointment. In some places, these can be less formal, less legally binding, but codifying, writing down your commitments is a very good idea. It sets expectations and drives mutual understanding. I won't go through these IBA topics. Most people are familiar with the kinds of things they are, but it's a broad range. And at the time when the IBAs in Voisey's Bay were negotiated, they were considered the leading representation of settling rights between developers and indigenous peoples in the world. The United Nations recognized them as such, and we were invited to go and talk at the UN about this particular reconciliation of rights and interests. So negotiating the IBAs was hard, but implementing them was harder. Our solution was to hand the agreements to the operations team and have them build all of the commitments into their SOPs. It's not a corporate function. We didn't hand it off to an office somewhere and say, you know, you guys got to look after that. We're going to go ahead and go mining. So we built it into purchasing. We built it into contracting. We built it into how the environment department ran. We built it into everything. Travis is sitting here. He knows this. And Perry is here somewhere too, and he knows this very well. They both worked at Voisey's Bay with me too many years ago to talk about. Anyway, the IBAs were given the same weight in our operation as was achieving production. We had to deliver on them. They were considered that important. And there's a counterpoint to that. I remember being at a conference, not too different than this one, but with 300 lawyers in the room. And I was talking again about Voisey's Bay. It was a long time ago. And somebody from Mining Watch Canada asked a question, and it wasn't really a question, it was a speech and it was an attack. And I was standing there and thinking to myself, well, I'm going to have to respond to that eventually. And there were two representatives of the Nunavut government desperately waving their hand, wanting to comment. I suggested that they should be given the mic, just to be polite. And they tore into the representative from Mining Watch Canada and said, how dare you think that we would abandon our responsibility to ensure the company does a good job, and that we would allow them not to do a good job. They're doing a very good job, and you guys should shut up and go home. And that's an interesting place to be if you're a mining executive when the indigenous group is standing up, tearing into the ENGO and telling them to shut up and go away. So I just sat down at that point. It all sounds good, but is it really good business? Is there a financial return? Because somebody in the corporate office is going to ask that question. Well, that sounds great, Tom, but how are we going to afford that? Well, yes. First off, as you've seen, not having local support, think back to the Innu fellow who's now, by the way, about 46 years old, and I know him, he's from the community across the river. I'm from Northwest River in Labrador. He's from Sheshchi, which is about 400 feet away. But at the time, he was part of 300 people who were stopping the project going ahead. And so, as you've seen, not having local support or even having local opposition can cost you years and millions of dollars. Inco bought the rights to go in the fall of 1996. We produced first ore in 2005. And when I joined the company in the January of 97, the slogan around the office in St. John's was concentrate in 98. They had to wait 7 more years because they'd screwed up the relationship. Second, not being able to build the project you want to build is not the worst thing that can happen to you. At least you still have your money. Building it, paying for it, and then not being able to run it is worse. Lastly, if you do everything right, well, I'll show you 2 slides, 2 graphs only, I promise. So this is just a graph that I put together a long time ago. This is feasibility performance between 1980 and 2006. Big projects in the Western Hemisphere. There's a whole whack of them across the bottom there. That's the number of projects up the side, and that's how much they were under or over budget when they were finished. The smooth implementation of the IBAs at Voisey's Bay allowed us to focus on building the project, and it went better than many other projects. We were 5% over on a $1 billion project. That's not bad. And equally as important, if not more so, is the timing. The yellow line is the price of nickel at that time, and the blue columns were what we were expecting, when we were expecting to produce and how much, and the red columns is actually what we did. As you can see, we came in 6 months ahead of plan to start ore, producing concentrate. We managed to ship our first load of concentrate in 2005 instead of 2006, and we cut the nickel price spike, and we had significant concentrate going into the market. And so our project had been premised on $3.50 a pound for nickel, and at this time the price went to $8, double what we had expected, and we had nickel concentrate to sell because we were in production, because things had gone so well, because we had fixed the relationship with indigenous people, and because we collectively had realized we'd made a terrible mistake in how we started off doing this project. By the way, what's not on the slide is that the price then went to $26 a pound, and I was the general manager at the time, and production was going so well that we filled our barn, which Travis and Perry will be well aware of, is down at the edge of Qikiqtaaluk Bay where our ship loader is. We filled our barn, and I called the then president and said, I'm going to have to shut down production. Bear in mind now, nickel was $26 a pound. That's like gold today being $20,000 an ounce. And I was calling him up, said, yeah, we're going to shut down now. And he said, he's a good fella, Bob Cooper. And he says, really? And I went, yeah, the barn's full and we can't stack any more in without risk. And he went, okay. And shut down. I couldn't believe the conversation went that easy. Anyway, but what about the stakeholders? So that's just talking about the mining company and getting to do and having a payoff and finding that it actually works financially. So the Voisey's Bay project has driven long-term high-wage employment in rural areas. I'm from a town of 537 people, if nobody died last night, and that's, you know, about as rural as you get. Almost. The coast of Labrador is more rural, but these communities have survived because of the number of people who leave there and work at the site at Voisey's Bay. The Innu and the Innu collectives, the municipal and provincial and federal revenue streams are extraordinary. I remember when iron ore, when nickel was $26 a pound, that year we paid more in taxes to the province of Newfoundland and Labrador than all the other mining companies and all the oil companies combined. That's how much wealth was being generated. And of course it was great for the mining company. That's why Vale bought Voisey's Bay. It's one of the reasons they bought Inco. But it was also good for us. It's good for us as citizens, good for the province. There were trust funds established. There are funds for other culturally desirable but economically infeasible activities that groups wanted to undertake. They could take the revenue stream that was coming from us, and they could pay for other projects that they would not have been able to afford. It doesn't matter if it's on the land programs for kids, or if it's language retention, or if it's elders being able to travel and do things. All those things, that revenue stream was there because of a mining company, going to people who would never work at the mine and wanted nothing to do with it, perhaps, but still were enjoying the benefits from it. Lots of funds for organization, the preservation of communities and lifestyle. Just try to stick on this again. My cohort from my hometown, I can't tell you how many of them work at Voisey's Bay. And they've been working there for 20 years, and they've all got good boats. They've all got good skidoos. They all got the best gear. They all got a good cabin. They've all got comfortable homes. They've all raised their kids successfully. They've all got stable lives, and they go away for 6 months of the year, and yeah, that's hard. But they're home for 6 months of the year, and they go to spend their time in their cabin. They follow their traditional lifestyle, whatever that might be. And these projects are what allow for that. What else? Education. The weird things that happen. We became the first adult basic education private site in the province. And we hired a literacy trainer at the, you remember, don't you, Travis? we hired a literacy trainer to work at the site who was literally teaching people to read and write, who couldn't, but was also invigilating university exams for people who wanted to do courses And whether they were related to what we were doing or not, it was just another way of serving the interests of our employees, but also potentially them then serving our interests by bringing those skills to bear. Sending financial planners into employees' homes so they didn't just talk to the employee who was at site, but they talked to the spouse who was at home, and planning for retirement, because a lot of people hadn't been in wage industries before. Go-to-school programs. We started off with stay-at-school programs, and people say, oh, I don't need a stay-in-school program. We need a go-to-school program because nobody comes, or not enough people come. All kinds of, I could run on about these at some length, but I don't intend to. It's just that one of the things that happened was we also created this enormous constellation of businesses around the project. And when we started up construction, it turned out that we awarded all of our contracts, all of our major contracts and most of the minor ones, to indigenous joint ventures, every one. And when we started up operations, over 60% of our workforce was either Innu or Inuit, which was unheard of. The next closest thing to that was a mine in northern Quebec, and they had 18% and thought they were doing great. If you put the effort in, if you make it part of your business, you can actually achieve this. And just before I finish up in a couple more slides, I just want to say there were some unforeseen. There are always unforeseen benefits that, despite how hard you, the mining company, or the stakeholders think about it, you will not think these up. We didn't. Nobody else did. There's a huge rate of type 2 diabetes in Labrador, and elsewhere too. But in Labrador, we have a lot of type 2 diabetes. In order to work at a remote site, you have to pass medical. In order to be able to keep working at the site, you have to stay healthy. In order to stay healthy, if you're a diabetic, you have to have your blood sugar level under control. To keep your blood sugar level under control, you have to avoid alcohol, you have to avoid unhealthy food, and you have to sleep properly, and you have to get exercise. And all of a sudden, we got feedback from the diabetes team in Labrador. You know, you're affecting the diabetes, the state of health of diabetics, because people want to work at your site, and we're not going to let them go to a remote site that they might not be able to fly out of if they have a diabetic crisis, unless they're fit. And so all of a sudden, we're seeing this kind of an impact. We had never thought of that, and neither had anybody else. Better, safer equipment at home. Everybody can now buy, everybody who worked there or had a relative who worked there was winding up using really good equipment, really safe equipment to be able to use at home. And they were also learning some other things. I'll come to that in a moment. We had instances of domestic violence reduction because all of a sudden we had 20% of our workforce was female. The national average was 8%, and we had 20% there, and we had people who had never had any power before, any economic power before, who were from small communities and who had no choice but to stay in those small communities. There was nowhere for them to go. And all of a sudden they had their own money and they had their own power and they could make choices that they hadn't been able to make before. That was pretty unexpected, but incredibly rewarding and to hear it. Just this week, for the Baffinland project, the air charter company has had to purchase a new aircraft. And we fly 737s into that airship that I was talking to you about. They've had to buy a bigger one, a 737-800, a new one. And there are 67 empty seats on that aircraft every time it flies up to Qikiqtaaluk from Montreal. They're going to sell those seats off. Right now, to get from Qikiqtaaluk to Montreal is $1,600 one way. They're going to sell them off for $699, $700. So if you're in Qikiqtaaluk and you want to go shopping, or you have to go south for health, or if you want to go to a hockey game, or whatever it is, if you have the money to go, you can now go for $700 rather than $1,600. Not the intention of the mining company, not the intention of the air company when they got into business with us and got our charter, but it's just it's a sideswipe, it's a spin-off, it's an unexpected benefit. Those are the things that add to the value of these projects. So, commonalities. Last slide. Place great value on the local relationships. Consider them as critical to your success as who you hire, what equipment you buy, what financing you can raise. Believe that it's possible that one day these relationships will be what make or break your business, and act accordingly. Stakeholders have a right to expect that exploration or mining will be beneficial to their constituencies, but they also must act and do their part to make sure that the businesses are successful. Otherwise, there's nothing to share in. The key to long-standing success is to make it mutual. Find a way to build that model. That's the model we built in Labrador. We didn't do it at first. We weren't very smart about it, but we got there in the end. So I'll say it again. Central Newfoundland is not Labrador back then, but there are commonalities. Things are going to change here as they did there. There will be opportunities for explorers, developers, and the people who have been here for much, much longer. Those opportunities will probably turn out differently than you think they're going to at the moment. That was true in Labrador, and it's probably equally true here. The Voisey's Bay project advanced land claims. A mining company advancing land claims. That hadn't been in the plan. We affected everything from diabetes to literacy, and it's lasted far longer than was originally planned. That 7-year plan, that went out the window. It's been operating for 20 years now, and it's just gone underground. So who knows from there how much longer it's going to last. The project, I think, is arguably the most successful mega project that's ever happened in the province. And I'm happy to argue that point with anybody, just in terms of its execution and what it's meant for people in the long term. Mutual cooperation and respect was the key to that, and bear that in mind, if you will, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you for tuning in to Gale Force Winds. That's Gale Force Winds, WINS.com.